never used to think much about where I worked. As long as I had my laptop, a good Wi-Fi connection, and a steady supply of caffeine, I could work from anywhere. My apartment was fine, but sometimes I needed a change of scenery. A place where the background noise of conversations and the hum of an espresso machine kept me focused. There was this coffee shop, a small, locally owned place that had the perfect atmosphere. Dim lighting, the faint scent of roasted beans in the air, and just enough chatter to keep me from feeling isolated. I'd been going there for months, setting up in my usual corner, ordering the same black coffee, and getting through my workload without much distraction. That morning was no different. I woke up early, grabbed my laptop, and drove over. The shop was quiet when I arrived, just the way I liked it. A few customers were scattered around, heads buried in books or laptops, lost in their own worlds. I ordered my usual, found my usual seat, and started working. For the first hour, everything was normal. Then he showed up. At first, I didn't notice him. He must have walked in while I was deep in my work, fingers typing away. But when he sat down at my table, I felt it immediately. It wasn't a large table, just a two-seater tucked into the corner. There were plenty of open seats elsewhere, but he chose to sit directly across from me. No coffee, no laptop, no book, just him. I tried to ignore him at first, assuming maybe he was waiting for someone. But as the minutes passed, he didn't move. He just sat there, hands resting on the table, eyes scanning the room. And then, slowly, his gaze settled on me. I pretended not to notice, kept my eyes glued to my screen. But the weight of his stare was impossible to ignore. Why was he watching me? I glanced up, expecting him to say something. Maybe he had mistaken me for someone else. Maybe he needed a charger. Maybe something. But he said nothing. The tension grew thick, uncomfortable. I wasn't scared, not yet, but I was definitely on edge. People didn't just sit down at a stranger's table without a word. It was weird. After a few more minutes, I decided I'd had enough. I wasn't going to sit there pretending this was normal. I started packing up my laptop, sliding it into my backpack, ready to find another seat. The moment I stood up, so did he. And that's when he finally spoke. "Where are you going?" His voice was quiet, almost casual. I hesitated. "I need to head home." He nodded, like he understood. Then, without missing a beat, he said, "Can you give me a ride?" That's when I knew something was wrong. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. "A ride?" I repeated, my voice careful, controlled. "Yeah," he said, still staring. "Just a quick one." There was something off about the way he said it. Not desperate, not embarrassed. Just expectant. Like he assumed I'd say yes. Like it wasn't weird for a total stranger to ask someone they'd been silently staring at for the past 10 minutes for a ride. I forced a polite smile. "Sorry, I can't. I have to get home." His expression didn't change. If anything, he seemed to consider my answer, as if he was deciding whether or not it was good enough. Then he did something that made my stomach turn. He stepped back slightly. Not much, just enough to make it clear he was giving me space. But his hands went behind his back, fingers loosely clasped together. It wasn't a normal stance. It was the kind of thing you'd see in a police interrogation video. Someone standing just casually enough to not seem threatening, but with their hands hidden, as if deciding their next move. I didn't wait to find out what that move was. I turned, walking briskly toward the exit. He followed. Not right away, not obviously, but I could hear him behind me. His footsteps just a half-second delayed from mine. The moment I stepped outside, the bright morning sunlight hit my eyes. But I didn't stop. I made a beeline for my car, my keys already in my hand, thumb brushing over the button to unlock it. I was halfway through the parking lot when I heard him. "You don't have to be rude, you know." I kept walking. His footsteps quickened. "Hey, I just asked for a ride." I reached my car, heart pounding now. I turned slightly, enough to face him but keeping my distance. "Look, I don't know you. You sat at my table without asking, and now you're following me. Just leave me alone." His face didn't change. He just stood there, watching me. I turned back, pressing the unlock button, and then I felt his hand grab my wrist. It happened so fast I barely had time to react. His grip was tight, fingers pressing into my skin as he tried to yank my hand away from the car door. Instinct kicked in. I twisted my arm sharply, breaking free before he could get a stronger hold. But in the process, my keys slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the pavement. I lunged for them. So did he. For a terrifying second, I thought he'd get them first. But my fingers closed around the key fob just as his hand brushed against mine. I snatched them up, jumping to my feet. And then he grabbed my arm again. This time, harder. I barely had time to think. All I knew was that if I let him get control, I was screwed. I did the only thing I could. I fought. I wrenched my arm away with all my strength, shoving him back at the same time. He stumbled, and that split second was all I needed. I turned, yanking my car door open and jumping inside. As I slammed the door shut, he lunged at the handle, trying to yank it open. Click. I locked it just in time. His face was inches from the glass, eyes wide, mouth twisted in something between frustration and amusement, like this was all some kind of game to him. I started the car, hands shaking as I threw it into reverse. He didn't move, not right away. He just stood there, watching. Then, just as I peeled out of the parking lot, he smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. Like he knew something I didn't. I didn't go straight home. I didn't want him to follow me. Instead, I drove to a nearby grocery store, parked, and sat there with my hands gripping the wheel until my breathing slowed. Then I called the police. They took my statement, asked me for a description, and even sent someone to check the coffee shop's security cameras. But by the time they arrived, the man was long gone. The footage showed him walking in, sitting at my table, and following me out. But the grainy footage didn't give them much to go on. No ID, no name, just a man. A man who had targeted me. A man who, for some reason, had picked me. For weeks after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching. That he was waiting. I started changing my routine, avoiding the coffee shop, parking in different spots, always checking my mirrors. I never saw him again. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that smile, and I wonder, was he just some creep who took it too far? Or did I escape something far, far worse? I never planned to own a coffee shop. It wasn't some lifelong dream, and I wasn't the kind of person who obsessed over different coffee roasts. But when I got the chance to buy Hearth and Grind, a small cafe on a quiet city street, it felt like a fresh start. The previous owner had been running it for almost a decade before deciding to retire. The place had charm. Warm wooden interiors, an old-fashioned espresso machine that looked like it belonged in a museum, and a few mismatched chairs that gave it a cozy, lived-in feel. I took over thinking I'd hire staff and manage from the sidelines. That didn't happen. Within weeks, I realized that running a coffee shop was way more expensive than I expected. Employees were a huge cost, and margins in coffee were thin. I couldn't afford a full staff, so I did what I had to do. I worked. A lot. Open to close, 6 days a week. Most nights, I closed alone. It didn't bother me at first. The city was always alive. The streets outside never truly empty, and nothing had ever happened before. But routines make you predictable. And one night, someone was watching. It was late October. The kind of evening where the cold creeps into your bones, no matter how many layers you wear. Business had been slow all day. A handful of regulars in the morning, a short lunch rush, and by 7:30, the shop was empty. I was exhausted. My back ached from standing, and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. I leaned against the counter, rubbing the back of my neck, and glanced at the clock. 7:50 p.m. We officially closed at 8 p.m., but I'd made it a habit to lock up a few minutes early if no one was around. It wasn't a big deal. After 7:30, we rarely got customers. I grabbed the keys, walked to the front door, and turned the deadbolt. As I did, something caught my eye. A figure stood across the street. They weren't moving, just standing there. I hesitated, my fingers still on the lock. The streetlight cast a long shadow behind them, but their face was hidden in darkness. I lingered a second longer, then stepped away from the door. I told myself it was nothing, just someone waiting for a ride, or maybe a drunk figuring out their next move. But something about it felt off. I went back behind the counter, moving on autopilot. Clean, stock, close. Same as always. I had just started wiping down the espresso machine when I heard it, the door handle rattling. I froze. My stomach tightened as I turned my head toward the door. I couldn't see the entrance clearly from behind the counter, but I saw movement. Someone pulling at the handle. Then nothing. A few seconds later, I saw them walk away. I exhaled, forcing a nervous chuckle. Probably just a late customer. They saw the closed sign and left. I shook my head, trying to laugh at myself. Then I heard it. Glass. Shattering. The sound exploded through the quiet cafe. For a split second, I just stood there. Frozen. Then footsteps. Someone was inside. My pulse slammed into my ribs as I dropped behind the counter, heart hammering in my chest. I could hear slow, steady steps moving across the floor. Not rushed, not panicked. They weren't here to grab and run. They were looking for something. Or someone. I pulled my phone out with shaking fingers and dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? I whispered into the phone, trying not to breathe too loudly. Someone just broke into my coffee shop. I'm hiding behind the counter. The dispatcher's voice was calm, controlled. Are you safe? Do you see them? I swallowed, peeking through the small gap between the counter and the floor. Shoes. Not sneakers. Not work boots. Dress shoes. They were standing right in front of the register. Stay on the line, the dispatcher said. Officers are on their way. But they wouldn't be here fast enough. I had to move. The hallway in the back led to storage, the bathrooms, and most importantly, the back exit. If I could get there, I could lock myself in or escape. I took a slow, deep breath. Then, keeping low, I crawled. The steps didn't move. Whoever was there, they were still standing at the counter. I reached the end of the counter and braced myself. Go. Now. I bolted. The second my feet hit the floor, I heard movement. A sharp turn. Footsteps. Fast. Following. I sprinted down the hall, grabbing the bathroom door handle. I threw myself inside, locked it, and then the handle turned. I pressed my back against the cold tile, gripping my phone like a lifeline. The handle twisted again, then stopped. Silence. I held my breath. Then a sound. Something soft scraping. Fingertips dragging across the wood. I squeezed my eyes shut. The dispatcher's voice crackled in my ear. Stay quiet. Officers are almost there. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then sirens. Flashing lights through the frosted bathroom window. Voices. Then banging on the front door. Police! I shoved the door open, nearly running into the nearest officer. They searched the shop. The front window was shattered. The cash register was empty. But the intruder? Gone. They never caught him. No fingerprints. No surveillance footage. Nothing. I kept the shop open for another year, but I never felt safe there again. Every night when I locked up alone, I felt it. That prickling sensation, like someone was watching. Eventually, I sold the cafe, moved on. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. The handle turning, the footsteps in the dark, and worst of all, the sound of fingertips dragging across the door. The police searched every inch of the shop. They checked the back door, locked from the inside. The only way in or out was through the shattered front window. But whoever had broken in had vanished. One of the officers, a detective named Pearson, pulled me aside. "You're lucky," he said, flipping through his notepad. "Most break-ins like this, the person doesn't just take the money." I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. They dusted for prints but found nothing useful. The cash register was empty, just like I expected. Whoever it was hadn't touched the coffee machines, the display case, or any of the supplies. It wasn't random. This person had come here for one thing, and I had the sickening feeling it wasn't just the money. I stayed behind after the cops left. The adrenaline had faded, leaving me shaky and exhausted. I looked around the shop, at the broken glass, the overturned stools, the register hanging open. It didn't feel like my place anymore. I tried to tell myself it was just a burglary, just bad luck. But deep down, I knew better. Whoever broke in had waited. They saw me lock up. They knew I was inside. And when they couldn't get in through the door, they'd force their way in anyway. It wasn't just a robbery. It was something else. I just didn't know what. The next few nights were hell. Even after replacing the window and upgrading the locks, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Every night as I wiped down the counters and counted the till, I'd catch myself glancing at the door, checking the windows, listening for footsteps. I started closing earlier. Then I started bringing a bat behind the counter. Then I started seeing him again. It was a week later. I was taking out the trash when I saw the figure standing at the far end of the street, half hidden in shadow. Same height. Same building. Not moving. Just watching. My hands went cold. I backed up slowly, heart hammering, and locked the door behind me. I turned off all the lights and peered through the window. He was still there. Minutes passed. Then finally, he walked away. I barely slept that night. I started carrying a knife. Paranoia seeped into everything. I kept my phone on me at all times. I stopped walking home alone. Every time a customer came in late, I felt my chest tighten. The worst part? I never saw his face. Just a silhouette. A shadow in the night. And that made it worse, because it meant he could be anyone. One night, I reached my breaking point. It was just after 7:30. The shop was empty. I was sweeping near the counter when I heard it, the door handle rattling. Slow, deliberate, like someone was testing the lock. I froze, heart pounding in my ears. Then a knock. Not loud, not rushed, just waiting. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knock came again, then silence. I inched toward the door, barely daring to peek through the glass. Nothing. No one was there. But across the street, in the glow of the streetlight, a shadow. Not moving. Just watching. That was the last straw. I didn't even wait until morning. I put the shop up for sale that night. Within months, it was gone. New owner. New name. I told myself I was moving on. But some things don't leave you. Because even now, in the dead of night, I still wake up. Heart pounding, breath shallow, with the feeling that someone is watching. And sometimes, I swear I hear it. That slow, deliberate rattle of the door handle. Waiting. The first time I stepped into Cedar Brew, it was more out of frustration than anything else. I had been working from home for months, and the walls of my tiny apartment were starting to close in on me. Between the constant hum of my neighbor's TV bleeding through the thin walls and the distractions that came with being too close to my bed, I knew I had to find somewhere else to focus. Cedar Brew wasn't a big coffee shop. It sat on the corner of a quiet street, wedged between a laundromat and a boutique that always seemed closed. The sign outside was faded, the letters chipped, but inside it was warm, inviting, almost too cozy. Small wooden tables, dim lighting, and the scent of roasted coffee beans made it the perfect place to sit for hours without feeling rushed. I picked a table in the corner against the wall where I could see most of the cafe. It became my spot. Over time, it became a habit. Every evening, I packed my laptop, grabbed my notes, and made my way to Cedar Brew. It was never too crowded, mostly students, freelancers, and the occasional bookworm. I liked that. I liked the silence that came with a late-night coffee shop. That was, until he showed up. It was a Wednesday night when it first happened. I had been working for a couple of hours, fully absorbed in my screen, when a notification popped up. Airdrop request from unknown. I blinked at the screen. My laptop sat open in front of me, the glow of the document I was working on casting a faint blue light over my hands. My phone was on the table beside me, but I hadn't touched it in a while. I frowned and glanced around the cafe. There were only 2 other people inside. A barista behind the counter wiping down an espresso machine, and a woman by the window sipping from a mug while scrolling on her phone. Neither of them looked like they were about to send a random airdrop. Curious, I accepted the request. A single image appeared on my screen. It was a face. A man staring directly into the camera. The image was grainy, the lighting poor, but I could still make out the details. He had short, dark hair, hollow eyes, and an expression that was neither a smile nor a frown. His mouth was slightly open, his lips pulled back just enough to show his teeth, as if he had been caught mid-sentence. The background was completely dark. I felt my stomach tighten. I looked around again, more carefully this time. The woman by the window hadn't moved. The barista was still cleaning. I turned back to my laptop, staring at the image. Who the hell sent this? I dismissed it as a prank. Maybe someone outside walking past the cafe had sent it. A bored kid trying to mess with strangers. It was creepy, sure, but harmless. At least, that's what I told myself. I shook it off and went back to work, the glow of my laptop screen feeling a little less comforting than before. 30 minutes passed. Then out of nowhere, a shift in the air. You know that feeling when someone is staring at you? When you just know? I looked up, and I saw him. He was sitting at a table near the back of the cafe. Same hollow eyes. Same strange, almost smile. I froze. It was him. The man from the photo. He was just sitting there, hands folded on the table, not moving, not blinking, just staring. A cold sensation crawled up my spine. I looked away, forcing myself to focus on my screen. My fingers suddenly stiff over the keyboard. I tried to ignore him, tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence, but I could feel him watching me. I didn't stay much longer that night. I packed my stuff, avoiding looking in his direction, and walked out of the coffee shop as casually as I could. The moment I stepped onto the sidewalk, I felt like I could breathe again. I glanced through the window. He was still there, still watching, but he didn't move. I hurried home, locking the door behind me, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. But I didn't go back to Cedar Brew for a few days. I didn't want to see him again. I told myself it was stupid, that I was letting one weird encounter mess up my routine. So a few nights later, I went back. And that's when it got worse. It had been 4 days since I last stepped foot inside Cedar Brew. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I had overreacted. Maybe the guy was just a regular customer. Maybe the airdrop was some kind of weird coincidence. So I went back. This time, I made sure to pick a different seat. I chose a table closer to the counter, where I had a clearer view of the entrance and most of the room. It was earlier in the evening, so there were more people inside. 2 students talking quietly over textbooks, an older man reading a newspaper, and the usual barista working behind the counter. It felt normal again. For the first hour, everything was fine. Then, as I was typing away, I felt it. That same unnerving sensation, the weight of eyes on me. I swallowed hard and forced myself to look up. And there he was, the man, sitting at a table near the back. Same distance as before. Same stare. It was like he'd materialized out of nowhere. I hadn't seen him walk in. I hadn't heard a chair move. I gripped my coffee cup, my fingers tightening around the ceramic as my heartbeat picked up. I looked around. Had someone else noticed him? Maybe the barista? Maybe one of the students? But no one seemed to react. No one even glanced in his direction. It was like he wasn't really there. I tried to ignore him, tried to focus on my work. But it was impossible. Every time I looked up, his gaze was still locked onto me. Not blinking, not shifting, just watching. I lasted another 10 minutes before I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my things quickly, trying not to seem panicked, but my hands were shaking. I slung my bag over my shoulder and stood up. That's when I made the mistake of looking directly at him. For the first time, he moved. His lips curled slightly into that same unnerving, almost smile from the photo. Like he was amused. Like he had been waiting for me to acknowledge him. I turned and walked out as fast as I could without running. As soon as I stepped onto the street, I felt the weight of his stare lift. I exhaled, my breath coming out shaky, and glanced back through the window. The table was empty. He was gone. That was the last time I went to Cedar Brew, at least for a while. But the problem was, avoiding the coffee shop didn't stop him. A few nights later, I was sitting in my apartment, working late, when I got another airdrop request. I hadn't left my laptop's Bluetooth on since that night in the cafe. But somehow, it was on now. And the sender was the same. Unknown. I stared at the notification, my stomach twisting. I didn't want to open it. I shouldn't open it. But my hand moved on its own. I clicked accept. The image popped up instantly. It was another photo of him. But this time the background wasn't dark. This time I recognized where he was. It was the hallway outside my apartment. I slammed my laptop shut and jumped to my feet. My chest was tight, my pulse hammering in my ears. I forced myself to move to the door, my fingers fumbling as I turned the lock as quietly as I could. Then I listened. The hallway outside was silent. I waited, barely breathing. Then, soft footsteps. Slow. Measured. Stopping right outside my door. I grabbed my phone, my hand shaking as I pulled up the security camera app linked to the camera outside my apartment. The feed loaded, and there he was, standing just outside my door, his face inches from the camera. That same hollow-eyed stare, that same almost smile. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, without warning, he tilted his head, like he knew I was watching, like he was listening to my breath on the other side of the door. I backed away, my legs feeling numb, my phone nearly slipping from my fingers. I wanted to call someone, the police, a friend, anyone. But my voice felt trapped in my throat. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he turned and walked away. Not in a hurry, not running, just calmly disappearing down the hallway. My hands were still shaking. My breath came in shallow gasps as I checked the lock. Still secure. But that didn't mean I was safe. How did he find my apartment? I pulled up the security footage and rewound it. For a full minute, his face filled the frame, staring straight into the camera. No blinking, no shifting. Just an unbroken, vacant stare. Then, without urgency, he turned and walked into the darkness at the end of the hall. I watched the video again and again. Each time, I felt something tighten in my chest. How long had he been watching me? I barely slept that night. Every little noise outside my apartment made me flinch. By morning, I was exhausted, but determined. I needed to do something. I went to the building's front desk and asked if they had seen anyone unusual in the past few nights. The security guard, an older man with a tired face, shook his head. No one out of the ordinary. I showed him the footage. He frowned, leaning closer. "Strange," he muttered. "We have cameras in the lobby and near the stairwells, but I don't remember seeing this guy." That didn't make sense. If he had entered the building, there should have been footage of him coming in. But there wasn't. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere. For the next few days, I barely left my apartment. I kept my laptop's Bluetooth off. I ignored any unknown airdrop requests. I triple-checked my locks every night. And for a while, nothing happened. No strange messages, no more sightings. It felt like maybe, just maybe, he was gone. Until one night, I was lying in bed, half asleep, when my phone buzzed. A new airdrop request. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to open it. But something in me, some horrible, morbid curiosity, made me tap accept. The image loaded. It was a photo of me, taken from outside my bedroom window. I bolted upright, my heart pounding as I turned to the window. The curtains were drawn. I hesitated, then reached out, gripping the fabric. I yanked them open. Nothing. Just the dark cityscape outside, the streetlights below casting long shadows. But then my eyes landed on something in the reflection of the glass. I saw it. A faint outline. A figure standing behind me. I spun around. Empty room. I barely remember the next few moments. Grabbing my keys, my phone, my bag. I didn't care about anything else. I just needed to get out. I rushed down the stairs, ignoring the elevator, my hands trembling so badly I could barely open the building's front door. Out on the street, I forced myself to breathe, to think. I needed help. I called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. I told them everything. The airdrop messages, the man in the coffee shop, the security footage. They checked my apartment. No signs of forced entry. No footprints outside my window. And yet, my phone buzzed again. Another airdrop request. "Decline," the officer standing next to me asked. "What is it?" I showed him the screen. He hesitated, then said, "Accept it." I did. This time, the image wasn't a face. It was a message written in a dimly lit room. 3 words. "You shouldn't have." I left my apartment that night. I packed a bag and stayed at a friend's place. The next morning, I went back with a locksmith and changed every lock. I replaced my laptop, got a new phone, deleted everything that could have connected me to that airdrop sender. I never went back to Cedar Brew. Months passed. No more messages. No more sightings. I started to think it was over. Until today. I was walking to work, passing by a row of cafe windows, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw him, standing across the street, smiling, watching, like he had been waiting, like he knew I would come back.